Hi, I'm Suzanne. I'm a writer, an author, a podcaster, and a budding astrocartographer.
And I'm Mychal. I'm a sommelier, tarot card reader, and former ballerina. And this is All the Woo, A to Z,
Seasonette 3,
Egypt.
Egypt.
First episode of Egypt. Yes.
Yes.
There's so many numbers there. Numbers, letters, all the thing.
So first, we want to welcome you to our table.
Yes.
And hope that you will sit down in this safe and non-judgmental space. And we are just going to talk about one of our great passions and loves in life. And there might also be some ranting.
A little bit, maybe. We'll try to keep it down to a minimum.
And entertaining.
But mostly these are our experiences with these subject as a reminder. So, yes.
And What are we drinking tonight, Mychal?
We are enjoying a sparkling wine from Albania by the name of Keush. So this one's spelled Keush in comparison to the
Kush or Cush or all the different ways that the Kushites of the culture that was south of southern Egypt.
Correct. Yes. So that's the connection there. Thank you. So similar, and you might be, I did not know that Albania made wine. Yes, they do. And these bubbles are delicious. They are made in the same style as champagne from Champagne, France, although they use different grapes, which I am not going to try to pronounce because I will just butcher the names. But what you need to know is that it is mouthwateringly delicious.
The saliva thing that we have learned from past episodes.
Yes. High acidity, high saliva.
Which is all a good thing.
All good. All good.
So, gentle listener, I want to set the scene here for you. If you were sitting here at this table with the two of us, you would see that Mychal is decked out in her Egypt wear.
I got the Egypt going on today. Yeah.
So what I can see is that she's wearing the fabulous pyramids and UFOs and camels t-shirt.
Yes.
That her next door neighbors bought her.
Mm-hmm.
And she is wearing at least one scarab and lapis.
Mm-hmm.
What else you got going on?
I have, what is that? Malachite and lapis lazuli also on a bracelet. This is a ring. It's not Egyptian, but, whatever. Other than that, I have on...
Hieroglyphic underwear?
No, I have a scent on. I actually have two scents on. So one on my wrists, I have amber and musk. And then on my throat and my third eye, I have essential oil from the blue iris.
Okay. So she is Egypt up.
Iris, lily.
Are you thinking of a lotus?
There we go.
Okay.
Words. I was like, this is not right.
I was kind of like, maybe that's also how it's referred to. I mean, the art doesn't look the same as an iris and a lotus. But
yeah, no. Okay.
No.
Ixnay iris.
Lotus.
That is a faulty of Mychal's memory right there. But most... If you go to Egypt currently, which is where I got it, they'll even say that you cannot purchase that essence anywhere else other than Egypt. Egypt has regulations on it that you can only purchase it from there.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things about ancient Egypt that we know is that for parties or gatherings, which, we have wine and we're celebrating Egypt, we could call that a party.
Mm-hmm.
They used to put a single lotus on their head, which they also had a perfume cone, which is a whole other conversation. But then the flower would fall kind of over their forehead. And you can see this in the art, but that way they were bathed in the scent of the lotus all evening long.
Yes.
As the perfume cone melted down.
That's one of the things. I know that this is not the topic of which we are going to speak of today. But one thing that I've always really enjoyed about the Egyptians that doesn't really come out that often is how into hygiene they really were, and how you smelled was really important.
And shaving.
Really
big into shaving.
Yes, exactly.
This is one of the reasons why I set books there. They were very clean.
They were super clean. They bathed regularly. They were aware of lice and how to manage that in their area, like all the things. Deodorant.
Generally have coverings on things. Like it wasn't a pillow, it was a headrest.
Yes.
Everybody wore wigs or headcloths. Very few people actually had their hair.
Right.
So, yes, clean.
Deodorant using. Yes, also important. I love that part because I don't think a lot of people realize. Anyway, this is not what we're here to speak on.
But Suzanne did think, if you were going to time travel back to a place that was going to smell good and look good, ancient Egypt would be it.
That would be the place.
And therefore I did. So we are going to be talking about the origins of Egypt because it is a super woo topic.
Yes. So woo, there's the multiple explanations of woo level.
So there are potential alien seedings. There are very advanced culture seedings of the gods actually being from some other advanced culture. There are, that various and assorted gods, like the Egyptians themselves had. Creation was one of the myths that they had so many explanations for, because for them it was such an enormous experience that from all these different points of view, all these things could be equally true. So they were the first culture that was really yes and.
Yes.
As opposed to what we have inherited in Western culture, which is either or.
Right. And that it was always also typically nothing existed purely on its own, that there was an equal and opposite to everything that existed as well, which is, they were all about balance.
And so historically, Egypt got, as we know it, the dynastic sort of foundations began when a ruler named Menes-Aha brought the upper and the lower Nile together, Nile valleys.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
So that's like a Egyptian dad joke.
Yes. I'll just put it on my pyramids and UFO shirt that I'm wearing.
So that is when traditional astrology and Egyptology and history agree that things started.
Yes.
But one of the fascinating things, and the reason why this becomes such a woo topic, is it appears that the Egyptians just sort of sprang forth to mix our cultural metaphors like Athena.
Yeah.
Just fully formed right there.
There you go. They're just ready, fully civilized, with technology rivaling our own today. Yeah.
With all parts of the culture already established and really didn't change for the, next several thousand years. And so that is one of the reasons why the origins of ancient Egypt are kind of, for both from a historical point of view of like, where did these people come from? They just showed up and they were completely cooked, or, aliens or gods or what have you.
Yeah.
So the beginning is shrouded
in mystery and woo. I have to say that for the woostery, okay, I'm officially bringing out all of my notes so that I'm hopefully as accurate as possible with what I'm going to say. But the thing that's always gotten to me about looking at traditional Egyptology and how they look at the origins of where it comes from is that it clearly shows that the technology that they had over time diminished.
Yes.
Right? That they had superior.
That's one of the biggest theories about the pyramids is like,
right,
their sculpture and the detail work and how finely everything is created in the Old Kingdom surpasses what you find in the Middle and New Kingdoms.
Yes. And even beyond that, the stones, not just the stone work and the intricacies of it, but that they used larger stones back then, and that you can see repair work that was done later on, because people don't always realize that the history of Egypt is so vast and long that literally the last ruler to rule what we know and consider to be ancient Egypt was closer to us in our history and where we are now than that person was to the beginning of their history. Like the gap is larger between the beginning and the last.
And I was working on a book about Cleopatra, and to kind of realize that Cleopatra, the Roman who, I'm putting vanquished and quotation marks because I have theories, who thwarted her ultimately, who became Caesar Augustus, was the Caesar Augustus mentioned in the New Testament. I almost said New Kingdom, in the New Testament, in terms of the man who sent Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem. So when you realize like those things were a little ball of history right then, within just, a couple of decades of each other. But then, as you're saying, the beginning of Egypt was 3,100 years before then.
Correct.
So a good 5,000 years from us now.
Yeah.
Plus change.
And even at that, like I was watching a woo-woo show. I was trying to get all caught up on my woo-woo alternative histories just so that I make sure that I do shout outs where,
where people have earned it.
Right. And
I just watched things that made me mad.
That also happens. But yes, I actually have watched a couple of those things just recently. However, this one, which was really nice, I guess, in the Temple of Edfu, that there are writings there that talk about the origins of where the people had kind of come from and that they settled there. And the time frame that it gives was that it was in 9,000 BC. Is that the way that they calculate it back would be about 9,000 BC, which makes it even older than what is even considered to be the tradition
of human history.
Correct. Yeah. Which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. But interesting because, there is the theory of the pole shift 12,000 years ago. So
there's also a quote that I had that ran across that it was, let's see if I can pull it up here.
She wrote it down.
I wrote it down that it was a priest that was speaking to
Herodotus?
Maybe.
Since he was the father of history and he was the one who gathered all the stories that became what we know of Atlantis.
Solon.
Yes.
Who's a Greek. Yes. So what the Egyptian priest told him is that they had seen the course of stars change direction 4 times, and that the Egyptian priest also said the earth rotating backwards twice in their time of civilization that they have marked down. So that they've actually seen the sun set where it has risen previously 2 different times. And that he was telling the Greek Solon that he's like, you guys are really young.
Yeah.
Really young. We've been around for quite some time. So come talk to us when you have some years behind you.
When you've seen the sun go backwards.
Yes, exactly. Which is crazy. And especially if you think, here we go on a woo-woo tangent. If you think about people discussing about what would happen when the poles shift, how that would change the potential rotation of the earth, all the different things that would happen.
The Gulf Stream.
All of the extensive water that would then be where it wasn't before, which is also, all of this feeds into a theory of like why there's so much water erosion around the temples.
Topics that we will be discussing in Egypt some other number.
Yes, exactly. So I'm not going to get too into it, but I mean, it all of these things feed into like, if you look at it this way, then it all kind of lines up. Anyway, so there we go. A little woo-woo tangent there for you.
Some more woo.
But for me, to get back to my original point, I feel like there's so much value to be had in traditional Egyptology. I'm not dismissing that at all. I think that there's a lot of holes, though, in how they're looking at it. And I think it's also a fault of Western archaeology and how they look at our history as humans to make the assumption that we are now at our most technologically advanced at this moment in time.
So I know you know this, but you, gentle listener, might not. And since I sort of have a corner on Jean-Francois Champollion, he is kind of credited as he was the father of hieroglyphs, basically learning how to decipher the symbols into what we understand as the language, which is why we can read hieroglyphs now.
Mhm.
He was trying to link Egyptian history with Bible history.
Mhm.
And at the time, especially, everything was using the Bible as a rather literal calculation of how time had unfolded. And so the linkings of things that could be considered close enough
Mhm.
and that seemed to fit. I mean, I don't think there was any malice but it was just an attempt to try and make it make sense to a Western mind that had never, ever heard of it. Their understanding of the Egyptians was only what was in the Bible, because that was all anybody really knew.
Yes.
And then linking those stories together. And so that's in many ways why we have the chronology that we have of ancient Egypt,
Mhm.
that ironically is passed down into Egyptology, which may have absolutely no regard for the timeline of the Bible, but this artifact um, is still present.
Right. Well, I think that there's a lot of things still to be garnered from the history of what the Egyptians have actually written down themselves. And to say that we've kind of gone through everything and fully looked at it and assessed it, like, they think there's a lot of dismissing of information, being like, oh, well, they were just boasting, or they were just making up stories, or whatever it may be. Not that I think that they think that altogether at all. However, there's a lot to be, for me personally, I take more to heart information that has been passed down within a culture than somebody who has been a culture completely outside of, that operates in a completely different way, to just all of a sudden step in and be like, we're going to assume they're like us, so let's put them in our box and look at it that way.
And so you were saying one of the memory keepers?
Yeah, so there is, if you want to look this gentleman up on the YouTubes, there's a lot of videos of him. His name is, more notes. He's known as a wisdom keeper of Egypt. It is Dr. Hakim Awyan. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he is very learned in multiple ways. He is an Egyptologist, but he also has studied what's called chematology, and Kemet was the name that the Egyptians called their own land, not Egypt. So there you go.
The red and black lands.
Right. So there's a lot of information that he has that he's kind of, it's by tradition of passing down that
Oral tradition
from generation to generation, that he's a part of that. And his explanation for a lot of things is very insightful. And given that, from what we can see so far, everything that they had done has been very intentional and been planned out. It wasn't just like, oh, let's do this because this seems like a good idea. And just kind of, I mean, if you're going to put that much man hours and like effort and money into like building huge monuments, one would think that you have like a general plan instead of like, we'll just wing it. It'll be fine.
It's not going to fall over.
It's not going to fall over. Yeah, that there's a real intention and reason behind everything that they did and that they created and that we still have around still today. So I'm more inclined to give that a little bit more weight for myself than, yeah.
And I think the other thing is that, when we look at this with Western eyes, we forget that science was magic, was religion.
Yes.
They were all together, and that the Egyptians had already perfected lots of different kinds of chemistry and metallurgy and just almost everything that had an ology.
Yeah. Well, isn't the word chemet part of the, if I'm not mistaken, part of the base word for chemistry? I think I don't know how rooted in fact that is. I'm just going to say that.
So now that we've talked about history's version of it and the fact or the possibility that it was aliens or any other number of things, Mychal and I both have the interesting origin story of we have no origin story for our love of Egypt.
Yeah. For me, it just always was. Like, I can't even tell you that there was a defining moment, like from a small child, always obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what did that obsession look like? as a little kid?
Whenever, because the internet did not exist when I was a child.
It's true.
Yeah, I couldn't just like Google stuff. It was literally going to the public library, being let loose, and then just going directly towards that section and reading everything that I possibly could, and constantly trying to Google to see if I could find a copy, like an actual transcribed copy of the Book of the Dead, which my sad little library apparently found itself too good to have something like that. But I always checked in hopes.
Just so you know, gentle listener, the Book of the Dead is probably about 30 feet long papyrus.
Yes.
And oftentimes parts of it, not the whole thing, but parts of it were written on the walls in a tomb. Because even the Egyptians, even though they had a copy that was buried with them, it was kind of like, okay, but when you get to this part, you may just need to read off the wall.
You need cliff notes for some of it. And so, yes, that was my mission as a small child, to try and find my own copy of the Book of the Dead. So you can tell it was just a very superficial,
just a passing
yes,
fancy.
Yes. And you?
Like you, I don't remember, but my first like sort of closer culture that I was fascinated by, and I think it's because there's some of the same things, but I mean, I knew the Egyptians from Bible stories. And so I was always making my Barbies be Egyptians.
Okay.
So I was much more, less into the magic side, more into costuming. But I also grew up with Cher.
Okay.
So Cher was, just anything where you could be tall with black hair and brown skin. I wanted to be that.
Yeah.
I am not I'm tall. There we go.
Yeah.
I'm tall. I have skin, but that kind of obsession first probably expressed itself as Native American, because at the time I lived in Texas. But when I was moving to Spain as a little kid, and I may have already told this story.
I don't know.
My grandmother, who knew I was obsessed with Egypt, gave me a book about Hatshepsut.
Yes.
And that was when it became hardcore. That was also when I got my own library card. So I could control
the books. Yeah, my only popular music crossover would be the Bangles, Walk Like an Egyptian.
Yep.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite songs as a child. Yes.
And I like the fact that I know her name was Susanna.
Yeah, that works.
And actually, when I knew I was on the publishing path, I started buying books by authors named Suzanne, and they were disproportionately about ancient Egypt, which I've never figured that part out. But it was kind of like out of 5 books by authors named Suzanne, 3 of them would be about ancient Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
something in the name
does mean lily, which brings it around to the beginning. Yes.
Not an iris.
So next time on All the Woo A to Z, we are going to be unlocking the mystery of the
pyramids.
Yep. We are going to be going deep into the woo behind the pyramids.
Join us next time.
All the Woo
A to Z.